She was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, born with royal blood running through her veins. Blood that should have opened every door, protected her from hardship, and guaranteed her a place among Europe's most privileged women. But instead, that same blood would become the greatest curse of her life, taking her children from her, poisoning her marriage, and turning an entire nation against her. Today, we are talking about Victoria Eugenia of Battenberg, the British princess who became Queen of Spain, and whose bloodline would leave a dark and bloody mark on the country's 20th century history. Leave a like, and let's get into her story. In 1887, a baby girl was born into the family of British Princess Beatrice. It was a particularly special year for the baby's grandmother, who was none other than Queen Victoria herself, because that year marked the 50th anniversary of her reign. So little Victoria, who was of course named after the Queen, soon became known as the Jubilee grandchild, and earned the affection of her grandmother, who was usually rather selective when it came to her numerous descendants. The mother of our heroine, Princess Beatrice, was Queen Victoria's youngest and last child, and the Queen had never wanted to let her go, either before her marriage or after it. As a result, Victoria Eugenia and her siblings spent their entire childhood directly under the wing of their powerful grandmother, who affectionately nicknamed the little girl her little treasure. But out of all her nicknames, the one that truly stuck was Ina, a shortened version of her second name, and the name by which she is often remembered in history. But Victoria Eugenia's idyllic childhood came to an end when she was only 9 years old. Her father suddenly died of typhoid fever, the very same disease that had taken the life of Prince Albert years earlier. His death devastated the entire family, although, in a strange way, it also brought the young girl even closer to her grandmother. Queen Victoria herself had lost her father when she was still an infant, so she understood the pain of a little girl who had suddenly been left without one. But even this bond was not destined to last much longer. On January the 22nd, 1901, Queen Victoria died. For the entire British Empire, her death marked the end of an era, but for 14-year-old Ina, it marked the end of her childhood. In 1905, London high society was buzzing with the news that King Alfonso XIII of Spain was coming to Britain on an official visit, and everyone knew that he was also looking for a bride. Many of Queen Victoria's unmarried granddaughters were excited by the prospect of such an advantageous match. Everyone, that is, except Victoria Eugenia. The modest young princess was convinced that the Spanish king would hardly even notice her. And ironically, that was exactly what caught Alfonso's attention. During an official dinner, he could barely take his eyes off her, openly admiring a young woman who behaved naturally, without any obvious attempts to charm him, flirt with him, or put on an act. The two soon began an intense correspondence, and just a few months later, Alfonso openly told his mother that Ina was his first and only choice for a wife. The problem was that neither his mother nor the other people around him were particularly thrilled with his choice. First of all, Ina was a Protestant, while Spain, as you probably remember, was a Catholic monarchy. But that was actually the smaller problem. By that point, people across Europe were already beginning to suspect that Queen Victoria's descendants through the female line were carrying haemophilia, a hereditary condition in which the blood does not clot properly. Because of this, even a relatively small wound or an internal injury could lead to prolonged and potentially dangerous bleeding. Another of Queen Victoria's beloved granddaughters, Alex, had already gone to Russia, and the heir to the Russian throne, Tsarevich Alexei, who was born in 1904, suffered from exactly this disease. Of course, people at the time did not have anything close to the understanding of genetics that we have today, but they were already beginning to put the pieces together, and naturally, no royal family wanted to risk having sick heirs of its own. But despite all the warnings, Alfonso still wanted to marry Ina and no one else. At that point in his life, he truly believed that love could overcome everything. But the wedding they had wanted so badly became the first bloody page in their story, and the first warning of what this marriage would eventually become. On May 31st, 1906, around 300,000 people lined the streets of Madrid along the route of the royal wedding procession, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bride in her magnificent dress, which was said to have cost $20,000, an enormous sum at the time. Flowers were thrown into the air, and the crowds shouted, "Long live the Queen!" But within seconds, the cheers turned into screams of horror. Hidden among the bouquets thrown toward the royal carriage was a bomb. The explosion shook the streets of Madrid. 37 people were killed, and dozens more were wounded. The royal couple themselves miraculously escaped death, but Victoria Eugenia's wedding dress was left soaked in the blood of one of the guards. But the young couple stubbornly pushed away any dark thoughts and continued the celebrations, determined to show their subjects that everything was fine. Even so, for a long time afterward, the young queen would still shudder whenever she had to ride through the streets of Madrid. By the autumn of that same year, Victoria Eugenia was pregnant, but the birth of the long-awaited heir turned into a genuine ordeal for the young queen. According to court tradition, royal childbirth was expected to take place almost publicly, with around 150 high-ranking diplomats waiting just outside the door of the delivery room. And as soon as their first son was born, also named Alfonso, the doors were opened before Victoria Eugenia had even had time to recover. Spain celebrated, and so did the royal family. But not long afterward, when doctors performed a medical procedure on the baby, they noticed that the bleeding would not stop. It was an unmistakable sign. The boy had haemophilia. Alfonso, just like the rest of the Spanish royal family, had known about this risk before the marriage. But once he was forced to face the disease in his own son, the young king's attitude toward his wife suddenly changed. His devotion gave way to resentment, and he placed all the blame on Ina. He accused her of having brought a curse into his family, and of having dared to pass this filth on to the heir, as though any of it had been her choice. The king began to distance himself from his wife, disappearing for long hours and sometimes even entire days without any explanation. And although the couple continued to fulfill what was expected of them as king and queen, and more children were born, Alfonso himself was drifting deeper and deeper into a world of excess. He had countless mistresses, and even his own mother would joke in horror about how many royal bastards must have been running around Spain. But Alfonso also developed another rather specific interest: adult films. Of course, there were no websites like the ones we have today, but Alfonso found his own solution. He commissioned these films to be made especially for him, becoming, you could say, one of the first major sponsors of this emerging industry. He had some very particular tastes as well, including erotic films involving priests and, apparently, women with especially large breasts. While her husband was discovering the fascinating possibilities of this new cinematic genre, Anna continued trying to hold the family together and dealing with one tragedy after another involving her children. In 1908, the couple's second son, Jaime, was born. This time, the prince escaped haemophilia, and for a moment, the family had reason to hope again. But the relief did not last long. The boy developed a severe ear infection, and an operation meant to treat it left him completely deaf. In Alfonso's eyes, once again, heir had turned out to be somehow defective. Fortunately, their third son, Juan, was completely healthy, which gave the monarchy new hope and even helped ease some of the tension between husband and wife. But when their fourth son was once again diagnosed with haemophilia, Ina found herself facing the same humiliation and accusations all over again. Altogether, the couple had 6 children, 4 sons and 2 daughters. Fortunately, as the future would later show, neither of the 2 girls inherited the disease from their mother, and neither of them passed it on any further. Despite her status as the mother of the heirs and Queen of Spain, life in her adopted country was never particularly easy. At first, the public welcomed the young and beautiful princess with great affection. For a time, she was almost as popular with the Spanish people as Princess Diana would become with the British many decades later. She was especially admired for her charitable work. Victoria Eugenia played an important role in the development of the Red Cross in Spain, and years later, she was even honoured with a statue in Barcelona, But gradually that affection began to fade. To many Spaniards, Ina seemed too cold and simply too foreign. She struggled to learn Spanish, and she disliked bullfighting, which she considered cruel. And the fact that some of the royal heirs were sick slowly became another reason for resentment, not only within the royal family, but among ordinary people as well. Things became even more complicated with the outbreak of the First World War. Ina's Austrian mother-in-law openly sympathised with Germany, while Victoria Eugenia naturally supported Britain. Spain officially remained neutral throughout the war, but many people still felt that Ina was far too sympathetic to the country of her birth. The world that emerged after the First World War was an incredibly fragile one. The conflict had shaken many monarchies that only a few years earlier had seemed like permanent symbols of stability. In 1918, Ina's cousin Alex was executed in Russia, together with her entire family. The Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, the German monarchy fell apart, and before long, the stability of the Spanish monarchy itself was also being called into question. On April 12, 1931, the Spanish people voted against the monarchy. Alfonso XIII was the first to flee to France, leaving his wife and children behind to pack their belongings, while an angry crowd gathered outside. As a truck rammed the gates of the palace courtyard, Ina turned to one of her servants and said, "I thought I had done well." Only a few days later, afraid that she and her family might suffer the same fate as her relatives in Russia, Ina left Spain with her children as well. She was leaving behind a country she would not see again for almost 30 years. Once they found themselves in exile and away from the public eye, the royal marriage finally fell apart completely. And here you could probably think of Prince Philip's parents as well, another royal couple whose relationship did not exactly survive once they were left alone with each other, without the structure and purpose that royal life had given them. At least Ina did not end up in a psychiatric institution like her cousin Alice. Instead, Alfonso, whose countless affairs were known to practically everyone in Madrid, somehow decided that now it was his wife who should be accused of infidelity. That was more than the Queen was willing to tolerate. "I never want to see your disgusting face again," she shouted at her husband. And that was essentially the end of their marriage. There was, of course, no divorce, but from that point on, the two no longer lived together and would barely see each other for almost a decade. But the rest of her life would not be any easier. For so many years, she managed to keep her sons alive despite the disease, but in the end, death still found them. In the summer of 1934, her youngest son, Gonzalo, was involved in a car accident. His injuries were relatively minor, but haemophilia did what the accident itself could not, and the prince died from internal bleeding. 4 years later, his older brother suffered almost exactly the same fate, dying from bleeding after another relatively minor car accident. And so, by a cruel twist of fate, the haemophilia Ina had inherited through the bloodline of her beloved grandmother ultimately took the lives of 2 of her sons. In January 1941, Alfonso XIII became seriously ill. Despite everything he had done to her and all the resentment that had built up between them over the years, Victoria Eugenia still came to the bedside of her dying husband. On February 28th, he died. From that point on, most of her attention was focused on the remaining members of her family. Her daughters married and renounced their rights to the throne, while 2 of her sons, Jaime and Juan, were still alive. And somewhere deep down, Ina continued to believe that one day one of them might return to Spain and restore the family to the throne. But Jaime was the son who had lost his hearing after his childhood illness. So, the dynastic hopes increasingly centered on Juan and, eventually, on Juan's son, Ina's grandson, Juan Carlos. Victoria Eugenia took a great interest in the boy, carefully teaching him about Spain and watching from abroad as the possibility of restoring the monarchy slowly began to take shape. Under the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, Spain was eventually declared a monarchy again, with the expectation that after Franco's death, the royal family could return to the throne. But Ina would not live to see that moment. She returned to Spain only briefly, for the baptism of her great-grandson, the future King Felipe VI, and died just a few months later in 1969 at the age of 81. When we think about the lives of princesses, we hardly imagine a fate like that of Victoria Eugenia of Battenberg. To ordinary people like us, it may seem that aristocratic blood should at least offer some kind of protection from the hardships and sorrows of life. But Ina's entire life shows us that this is simply not true. The most expensive wedding dress and the most beautiful diamonds in the world mean very little when your children are sick, your husband does not respect you, and your own subjects hate you. Time and history eventually put everything in its proper place, and the good name of this unfortunate queen was restored. Her surviving descendants are healthy and still rule Spain today, carrying within them the very same blood that had once been a curse for Ina.